There are moments on live television that nobody in the control room has a prepared response for. Not because the control room has not prepared. The control room always prepares. The producers and the segment coordinators and the technical staff and everyone else whose job it is to make the show happen in the specific and organized way that the show is supposed to happen have spent the hours before the taping doing exactly that, preparing, assembling the rundown and the talking points and the graphics and the transitions and all the other infrastructure that allows 90 minutes of live television to proceed in the direction that 90 minutes of live television is supposed to proceed. They prepare for the expected and they prepare for the unexpected in the general way that experienced television professionals prepare for the unexpected, which is to say they prepare for the categories of unexpected that their experience has taught them to expect. The guest who goes off script and the co-host who says something that requires management and the segment that runs long and the technical problem that needs to be navigated and all the other varieties of the unexpected that become, through sufficient experience of them, expected in the specific and paradoxical way that things become expected when you have been surprised by them enough times to have developed the reflex for them. But there are moments that are outside even this category. Moments that the preparation does not cover because the preparation cannot cover them because they are genuinely outside the range of what the experience has taught the people doing the preparing to prepare for. The morning that Alyssa Farah Griffin asked the question she asked on The View was one of those mornings. The question was 5 words. It landed in the studio with the specific and slightly vertiginous quality of something that has arrived from a direction that nobody was facing and that required everyone in the room to turn simultaneously to face the direction it had come from before they could even begin to process what it was that had arrived. Are black people equal to white people? 5 words. A question. Asked in the specific and flat and completely direct tone that Alyssa Farah Griffin used when she was saying something that she meant completely and that she was not going to soften or decorate or provide the diplomatic packaging for that might have made the saying of it feel less like the thing it was, which was the most direct possible statement of a position in the form of a question. The question that contained within it the position and the challenge to the person across from her. Simultaneously, the question that said I believe the answer to this is yes and I am asking you if you believe the same thing and I am asking you in this specific and public way because the conversation we have been having has led me to a place where the asking of this question is the most honest response to the conversation. 5 words. And the studio went quiet in the specific and complete way that studios go quiet when something has been said that the studio does not yet know how to categorize, that has arrived outside all the available categories and that the room is therefore in the process of simply receiving before it can determine what the receiving of it requires. The conversation that produced the question had begun the way conversations on that show often began, with a news item and the table's response to the news item and the specific and rapidly escalating quality of 5 women who had genuine positions on the news item and who were going to express those positions with the full weight of who they were and what they believed and what they had lived through and what they knew, which was the quality that made the table rather than simply 5 people sitting at a desk. The news item was the SAVE Act. Voter ID legislation. The question of whether Americans should be required to present government-issued identification in order to vote, which was a question that had been in the American political conversation for long enough that both the arguments for it and the arguments against it had been refined through that long presence in the conversation into the specific and well-developed forms that each of them now took, that could be stated quickly and clearly and with the full weight of the evidence and the history, and the values that each of them drew on. This was the territory. And the table was going into the territory with the specific and honest quality of people who had genuine positions about the territory and who were not going to paper over the genuine positions with the diplomatic language of false agreement. Alyssa Farah Griffin stated her position. She said she was in favor of requiring some sort of government-issued identification to vote. She said this was the position of most Americans. She said it in the tone of someone who had thought about this and who had a reasoned position about it and who was presenting the reasoned position as the opening of a conversation rather than the conclusion of one. The position was a position. It was the position that a significant portion of the American political landscape held and that had been held with the same consistency that Alyssa Farah Griffin was expressing it with, for reasons that its holders believed were reasonable and that were grounded in the general principle that the verification of voter eligibility was a legitimate interest of a functioning democracy. She stated it. She meant it. And she was aware that the table she was sitting at was going to respond to it, that the conversation was not going to accept the position as settled and move on but was going to engage with it in the specific and complete way that conversations at that table engaged with positions that the table had not reached consensus on. Sunny Hostin engaged with it. Sunny Hostin's engagement with things that she had a position on had a specific and completely recognizable quality that the people who watched the show had come to know and to understand as the quality of someone who did not arrive at positions casually and who did not defend positions casually, who brought to the defense of a position the specific and very thorough quality of someone who had thought about the thing and who knew what she thought about it and who was going to say what she knew, with the full weight of the knowing behind the saying. She said that African Americans had fought and died for the right to vote in this country. She said it with the specific and weighted quality of someone who was not making a rhetorical point but stating a historical fact that she believed was essential to any honest conversation about the subject being discussed, a fact that could not be set aside in the interest of getting to the policy question quickly because the fact was itself part of the policy question, was part of the context within which the policy question existed and without which the policy question could not be honestly understood. She brought in the history, the jelly beans, the literacy tests, the citizenship questions, the specific and documented and deeply American history of the mechanisms that had been used to prevent the right to vote from being exercised by the people whose exercise of it was being prevented. She placed the current conversation in that history. She said the placing of it in that history was not a rhetorical move but a factual one, that the history was real and that the current conversation was happening in the context of the history whether anyone at the table acknowledged the context or not. The table was in the territory now. The territory was not comfortable. Not because comfortable was what the territory was supposed to be, but because the specific and genuine quality of the positions being expressed and the specific and genuine history being invoked and the specific and genuine stakes that both of those things represented for the people at the table who felt them as genuine stakes rather than as rhetorical positions was producing in the room the specific quality of a conversation that had exceeded the ordinary parameters of the format and had become something that was more than the format, that was the actual conversation rather than the version of the conversation that the format produced. The table was in the actual conversation. And the actual conversation was going somewhere. Alyssa heard Sunny's argument and she responded to the responding. Not defensively. Not with the quality of someone who felt they were being accused of something and who was responding to the accusation. With the quality of someone who had heard the argument and who had a specific and direct response to the argument that she was going to give because giving it was what the honest engagement with the argument required. She said that black women were among the most educated demographics in the country. She said they had identification. She said they were showing up to vote in substantial numbers. She said that the argument that voter identification requirements disproportionately affected black voters was an argument that she found, when examined against the actual evidence of black voter participation and black voter identification rates, to be an argument that treated black voters as if they were less capable of obtaining and presenting identification than other voters, and that this treatment was itself something she found troubling. She said it directly and she said it completely and she said it with the specific and earnest quality of someone who genuinely believed what they were saying and who was saying it not as a political move but as the honest expression of a position that they had arrived at through their own thinking about the thing. Sunny was not done. The exchange had the specific and escalating quality of a conversation between two people who were both genuinely engaged with the thing they were disagreeing about and who were therefore not going to reach the comfortable pause of the managed disagreement where both sides acknowledge the other side's point and agree to continue to disagree in the specific and non-disruptive way that managed disagreements on television are concluded. They were in the actual disagreement. The actual disagreement did not resolve into the comfortable pause. The actual disagreement produced the next thing, which was Sunny returning to the argument with the specific quality of someone who felt that the response she had received had not engaged with the core of what she had said and who was going to say the core again in the form that made it impossible not to engage with. And then Alyssa asked the question. Not in the way that the outline described as the explosive climax, not with the theatrical delivery of someone who is detonating a device they have been carrying into the conversation with the specific intention of detonating it at the right moment for maximum effect. In the way of someone who has been in a conversation and who has reached the point in the conversation where the question underneath all the other questions has become the question that the conversation is actually about, and who is going to ask it because asking it is the only honest thing to do when the question underneath all the other questions is where the conversation has arrived. She asked it in the flat and direct and completely serious tone of someone who was asking a genuine question that she wanted a genuine answer to, not a rhetorical question whose answer she was assuming in advance, but the actual question that the actual conversation had produced: are black people equal to white people? And then she said she thought so. She said that apparently this had become the far-right position. She said that she was making it her position regardless of what position it was associated with, because she believed it was true and she was going to say it was true regardless. The line about Sunny came after this. It came in the heat of the exchange, in the specific and slightly combustible quality of a conversation between two people who were both entirely convinced of their own position and who were in the specific and frustrating experience of feeling that the other person was not engaging with what they were actually saying, but with a version of what they were saying that misrepresented it in a way that felt like something more than misunderstanding. She said Sunny was a racist. She said Sunny was an idiot. She said Sunny seemed to think black people were less than. She said she did not think that. It was the moment that the outline had called the explosive climax. It was explosive. It was also the moment that required the most care in the analysis, the most honesty about what was actually happening rather than simply what the inflammatory quality of the words made it feel like was happening. What was actually happening was two people who had very different understandings of the same historical and political reality and who had arrived in the conversation at the point where the difference between their understandings had produced a collision that the diplomatic management of the conversation could not absorb. Alyssa believed that requiring identification to vote was a neutral policy applied to all voters equally, and that characterizing it as discriminatory was itself the thing that was discriminatory because it assumed that black voters were less capable of meeting a requirement that other voters were expected to meet. Sunny believed that the history of the specific and documented use of procedural requirements to suppress black voter participation meant that no procedural requirement affecting voting could be evaluated without the context of that history, and that evaluating it without the context of that history was not neutrality but the specific and convenient blindness to history that produced policies with discriminatory effects, regardless of whether the discrimination was the intent. These were not simply rhetorical positions. They were the expression of two genuinely different understandings of what the relevant history meant and how the relevant history should inform the current policy question. And the collision between them was the collision between those genuinely different understandings, expressed in the specific and heated way that genuine collisions are expressed when the people in the collision are fully in it. The studio was very quiet in the seconds after the line about the racist and the idiot. Not the quiet of shock in the dramatic sense. The quiet of a room that has received something that it is processing in the specific and necessarily sequential way that processing happens when the thing being processed is large and the processing requires more than the instant response that certain categories of things require. The co-hosts were quiet. The audience was quiet. The cameras were running in the specific and indifferent way that cameras run, recording what was in front of them with the complete and non-judgmental accuracy of the recording apparatus. Joy Behar looked at the table with the expression of someone who had seen many things in 30 years at that table and who was in the process of determining where this thing sat in the taxonomy of the things she had seen. Whoopi was still with the specific quality of stillness that Whoopi deployed when the situation required more than the usual tools and when she was giving herself the moment to determine what the situation actually required before deploying anything. Alyssa continued. She moved to the sanctuary cities argument. She asked why you would not want some identification at the voting booth unless you wanted people who were in the country illegally to be able to vote. The question changed the territory of the conversation again, moved it from the historical argument about the impact of voter ID requirements on black voters to the argument about immigration and the relationship between immigration enforcement and voting rights, which was a different argument with different implications and that required the table to receive both the previous argument and the new one and to navigate the relationship between them in real time. The table received them. The navigation was happening in real time. The cameras were still running. What the morning produced in the room that day was not a resolution. The conversations that are actually about something do not resolve in the time that a television segment allows for resolution, do not arrive at the comfortable conclusion where both sides acknowledge the validity of the other's position, and the conversation ends with the sense that something has been understood that was not understood before. The morning produced something else. It produced the specific and honest record of two people who held genuinely different understandings of a genuinely important question, and who expressed those different understandings with the full weight of who they were and what they believed, without the diplomatic softening that would have made the exchange easier to manage but would have also made it less true to the actual state of the disagreement between them. It produced the clip. It produced the conversation that the clip generated. It produced the specific and lasting quality of something that was actually about something, that had the realness of the actual disagreement rather than the managed appearance of the actual disagreement. The show continued after the exchange. It always continued. The forward motion of the program was the professional responsibility that the people at the table and the people behind the cameras and the people in the control room maintained regardless of what happened in the segments that the forward motion was carrying them through. The conversation moved to other things. The day moved to other things. And the clip of Alyssa Farah Griffin asking, "Are black people equal to white people?" and saying what she said afterward, and the clip of Sunny Hostin saying what she said before and after went to the places that clips of that specific quality go. To the places where the conversation about what the clips meant and who was right, and whether the line about the racist and the idiot was appropriate, and whether the voter ID argument was the thing Alyssa said it was or the thing Sunny said it was, continued in the specific and distributed and intensely argued way that conversations about things that actually matter continue when the starting point for the conversation has been a moment of genuine and unmanaged and fully expressed disagreement between two people who both genuinely believed what they were saying. The table was at the table the next morning. The people who had been in the exchange were the people they were the next morning, the same people with the same genuine understandings of the same genuinely contested questions, sitting at the same table in the same studio with the same cameras running and the same audience watching and the same format requiring the same forward motion through the same categories of topic that the program had always required the forward motion through. The morning that had produced the exchange was in the record. The record was permanent. The conversation that the record had started was continuing. That is how genuine conversations continue. Not by being resolved but by being had, by being expressed with the full weight of what the people having them actually believe, by arriving at the moments that nobody in the control room has a prepared response for, and by being fully and honestly in those moments with the specific and irreducible quality of people who are genuinely there.